I designed the program when I was finance minister of Afghanistan, and it is the first attempt at a comprehensive national program in the country. The goal of the program is to reverse the classic relationship between the government and the citizens, namely that the citizens are trusted with decision rights and with money in return for very few conditions that are conditions of democratic governance. Namely, they have to have a secret ballot-based election where men and women both participate. 2, they have to have a quorum where 70% of the villages have to. And 3, they have to post all their accounts in public places. The program has been working remarkably well. I've reviewed it in the recent months and again seen how critical it is, and all foreign observers who have had an opportunity to visit firsthand are amazed at how a program that is designed and directed towards basic democratic governance works at the village level. The security condition is adversely affected all development because what has emerged is cost of protection, meaning that either formally or informally, all development actors have had to pay one or another group of criminals or those who can apply a credible threat of use of force. Freedom of movement has been curtailed very, very substantially. The ring road, which was the jewel in the crown of the developmental effort to allow transport all across the country. Ring road is the road that provides a linkage all across country, and then with the borders, with the exception of central Afghanistan, is heavily infested. Recently, British forces carried an enormously dangerous activity to put a turbine in one of the major dams in the south. So you can see that security is taking a toll. But it's not just overall sense of security posed by the insurgency. It's the rise of criminality. Merchants, investors have been kidnapped in broad daylight in the city of Kabul, in the capital, and also the threat is spreading elsewhere. So deterioration of security is something that is reversed perceptions of the people from 2004 to now. From 2001 to 2004, developmental issues were the key priority of the country. Now, security is the first priority of almost anybody you talk to. The long-term solution basically is 3 key elements. Building an order that is legitimate and where security is a component of law and order rather than the other way around. Afghanistan will not be secured by use of force alone. We have to have a moral sense of purpose and a law that applies equally to everybody. The second element is jobs. Without jobs, there's not going to be security. I was talking to people who had carried a very large survey of residents of the South, around 600,000 people. And I asked them, what's the definition of a Talib? And without a moment's hesitation, the 4 people who had carried the survey said an unemployed youth. 65% of the population is under 25. With that kind of demography, the country is one of the 5 youngest countries in the world, and every day it's becoming younger. We have to have a coherent approach to jobs, and that means investing in people and their capability. And third is the sense of national identity. We have to articulate a sense of identity as what it means to be an Afghan in the 21st century, so that the subdivisions around which an ethnic politics is revolved and is frankly become a politics of patronage and commerce is brought in within a politics of engagement with the world at large and with a nation in the context of the 21st century. Investment creates opportunities. Aid is usually a catalyst or ephemeral. The problem with aid from the United States is that it's extremely tied to Washington. It's largely captured by a very limited number of firms around the Beltway who can write the proposals, but who are not oriented towards implementation. The outsourcing of the government in the United States has gone so far that the capability to actually manage contractors is in serious doubt. Because of this, all the accountabilities that are written on paper actually are not enforced. So at best, out of $1, we get 10 to 20 cents in Afghanistan. The rest is paid for these layers of contractors. And by contrast, when foreign direct investment comes transparently and comes from the best segments of the global corporate sector, it creates meaningful employment. For instance, in the telecom sector, we secured $1 billion of direct foreign investment. We went from 100 phones to over 5 million phones in the course of 6 years. 75% of the country now has coverage, and the largest taxpayer in the country now is telecom sector. So from zero to that shows you the capabilities. And the key to this, again, was OPEC, the overseas private sector investment arm of the United States, a very timely decision by the then Secretary of Development of Britain, Claire Short, to provide us some of the best technical advisors for 6 months so that the rules could be developed transparently and applied with credibility. The first issue with the agricultural sector is that it's been completely ignored. Again, because the aid industry in general and USAID in particular have been dealing with agriculture, they've lacked a coherent strategy. So a lot of firms that have been contracted for this have produced strategies on paper. Northern Afghanistan in particular had a thriving industrial agriculture linked to industry. And in recent months, when I've reviewed it, it's devastating. The second issue is that Afghanistan, for subsistence, is heavily dependent on rain-fed agriculture in the north of the country. In 2008, the rains did not come. Because of that, there's an emergency food situation. 5 million Afghans during the winter of 2008, 2009 are going to be in desperate need of assistance. A lot of people who have made their living from animal husbandry or historically have been called nomads, though really specializing in animal husbandry, again, are in danger because their flocks do not have feed or water. And the other is food prices have doubled during 2008 and at times have tripled or quadrupled. This combination of rising food prices, declining security, and lack of a clear developmental strategy regarding agriculture and its component parts, which means today power and water, seeds, etc., is making for a dire situation this winter. It also calls for learning from the past 7 years and focusing consistently and coherently on an agricultural development strategy that would feed both into the regional conditions and global conditions. Yes, the absence of a coherent agricultural strategy to provide farmers with crops that would have an outlet to the European market, to the Gulf market, Chinese market, and the US market was a major driver towards adoption of drugs. Because in 2002, we received food aid. And despite repeated attempts of the Afghan government, which I was serving, not to provide us with food aid, but provide us with cash for work, which was important to reinforce agricultural conditions because of conditions here and elsewhere of tied aid by the donors, food aid was adopted. And that meant that in 2002-03, for the first time in Afghan history, farmers did not find it profitable to harvest their wheat. and consequently abandoned it and massively shifted towards it. An agricultural strategy that has access to the markets of Europe, the Gulf, China, India, and the United States is absolutely essential. And that means, as the Doha rounds is not taking place, we have to devise a special arrangement if the scourge that is threatening our children and the children of the world overall is to be tackled. Uh, First of all, I think economic cooperation is the key to the future of the two countries. Afghanistan depends on transit on Pakistan because that's our lifeline. And Pakistan now will be depending in the future on electricity and water from Afghanistan and on transit to and from Central Asia. So it's imperative to think along the lines of the steel and coal community that eventually became the European Union as a way of addressing and developing medium and long term interests rather than the short term. In the short term, the problem as viewed from Afghanistan is a very simple one. No Afghan knows what is the definition of Pakistan's national interest. The Pakistani government has not been able to articulate a view of its national interest that is consistently followed and that involves peaceful coexistence with its neighbors with an emphasis on economic cooperation. And unless and until this happens, it is very difficult for Afghans to guess as what are Pakistani national interests. Definition of national interest entails taking account of your neighbor's interest because domination of neighbors cannot be part of your national interest simply because that would result in conflict and crisis. The other issue was that at the beginning, some Pakistani decision makers closed their eyes to the reality of the threat of terror that was arising from their tribally administered areas. The word tribal area is distinctive in that Pakistani law, from first the British law and then Pakistani law, is not applied there for years. So the state is reasserting its presence in this area. But they closed their eyes to that threat. They thought that the threat was directed towards Afghanistan alone. What we need to grasp both together is that threat of terrorism in the region is not something that was cooked in Washington or Brussels. It is something that is threatening our vital needs, interests, and our ways of life. And we need to come together and address it coherently. Kabul alone cannot address it. Islamabad alone cannot address it. But history has shown when Kabul and Islamabad come together coherently, they can match the politics of the tribal area and bring a different perspective. It also needs to be said that the tribal areas of Pakistan are among the most neglected areas in terms of social and economic development. So a comprehensive plan that would involve cooperation across the line among the two countries is essential to providing opportunities for uplifting of conditions. And here the Gulf can play a very important role because the largest number of people who are making their living both sides of the line in Afghanistan and Pakistan or in the Gulf, and cooperation with the Gulf could be essential to containing the negative impact of this phenomena and enhancing the positive. The issue in Afghanistan is more problematic in that the leadership in Afghanistan has not been able to contain corruption and pursue a sustained agenda of rule of law. So the legitimacy of the Afghan leadership was a lot more in 2005 than the Pakistani leadership because the Afghan president, let us not forget, was elected directly by the people and is bound by the constitution of the country. The Pakistani leader then was an unelected general who would come through force. So the legitimacy of the two regimes in terms of rulers differ. But Pakistan is internal institutions, particularly its army, that can guarantee the regime. the challenge in Afghanistan was to develop institutions. And the leadership in Afghanistan has been found wanting in terms of rising to the challenge to become the founding fathers and mothers of a proud nation. Their lack of capability to govern with a sustained agenda, their refusal to tackle corruption in a systematic manner, their refusal to engage in a strategy that would contain narcotics coherently and go after others, and particularly their failure to develop institutions and invest in the young people or issues that are putting national interest in jeopardy. Because we have a proverb, it says, mind your house first before you accuse your neighbor. And the overwhelming Pakistan is a source of threat. There's absolutely no question about it. But there's also significant failures in Afghanistan that have to be squarely put on the shoulder of the Afghan leadership. So both leaderships in Kabul and Islamabad missed an historical opportunity to change the region in the Islamic world. Their pursuit of short-term agendas are causing us medium and long-term gains. We're at a crossroad. I'm an optimist. I'm a pessimist optimist. Pessimist because one has to know all the difficulties. And I'm an optimist because I know the strengths of the situation. So one has to think in terms of scenarios. While there are a lot of negative developments in the region, there are also an enormous reservoir. The reservoir is the goodwill of the people of Afghanistan and the goodwill of people of Pakistan towards the world at large. We do not deserve the governments that we've got. If we can change the nature of governance, the people are 10 miles ahead of us in terms of embrace of globalization, in terms of embrace of democratic values, in terms of their demand for law and order. So if that agenda is to be pursued, then I think the region could be having a marvelous second chance to transform itself. This acquires simultaneously far-sighted leadership from the next U.S. administration. Were that capability to be mobilized to look at the region coherently, and particularly to look in Afghanistan and Pakistan together rather than two islands, and then bring Europe, Japan, and China to a strategic partnership that really aims minimally at 10 years of building capable states and functioning markets in the region, the future could be bright. Otherwise, the danger of chaos is very real.